Hello and welcome to this edition of World at War. My name is Mohammed Saleh. In principle, a partial ceasefire has been agreed upon for the naval attacks in the Black Sea, and both Russia and Ukraine have also agreed for a moratorium on strikes against each other's energy infrastructure. For a war that has dragged on for well over 3 long years now, these are positive steps. But even the leaders who put ink on paper for these agreements aren't convinced that this deal will hold. Volodymyr Zelensky has claimed that Vladimir Putin will die soon, and that will usher in peace, for which Putin has responded by saying that Ukraine needs to be placed under a temporary administration for elections to be held, and the new government of Ukraine would then sign a peace deal. Now, what has also complicated matters for Ukraine is that the transactional Donald Trump has come up with a new minerals deal, which some experts point out is pushing Ukraine towards becoming either a Russian colony or an American colony. But Donald Trump's obsession to take over Greenland is creating a whole new dynamic in the Arctic. Russia, with its commanding position of the Arctic, sees itself as the commander of the melting ice of the Arctic. But the United States, wanting to take over the Arctic, could unlock a whole new conflict even before the Russia-Ukraine war finds its resolution. Our next report gets you the details. On the face of it, this may look like a calm city in Ukraine, but this is actually the most dangerous city along the front lines. Day after day, week after week, and month after month, Kherson, which had been occupied by Russia and later recaptured by the Ukrainians, has been subjected to a never-ending barrage of missile and drone strikes. The city had once boasted a population of over 300,000 people, but less than 60,000 people have stayed back, most of them elderly, who have no place to go to escape from the war. The hospitals here are always full of people with shrapnel wounds, and a Russian drone or missile strike could happen at any moment. In principle, there is a moratorium on attacks targeting energy facilities between Russia and Ukraine, but the reality on the ground is starkly different. These drone images are of a gas metering station near the town of Sudzha that is on fire. Russia has accused Ukraine of practically destroying a key piece of gas infrastructure despite a moratorium on such strikes. But a Ukrainian official said that it was Russia that attacked the gas transit point in Sudzha. In Kharkiv, at least 9 people were injured in a Russian drone strike that sparked a massive blaze. On the other hand, the agreement to stop naval attacks in the Black Sea has managed to hold by and large. Russia's Black Sea fleet has sustained a massive battering. Nearly 30% of all Russian warships have either been sunk or have been badly damaged and rendered ineffective. So how close are we to a deal? Well, you should listen to the Ukrainian president himself.
The second thing he is afraid of is the loss of power. This depends on the stability in the society, but also on his age. He will die soon, that's a fact. Everything will be over then. I mean, the question about him, all may end before his, so to say, absolutely safe and unsuccessful, historic life ends. This is what he is afraid of.
The Russian president hit back almost immediately, echoing his repeated earlier statements that Volodymyr Zelensky lacks legitimacy. Putin insisted that the path to peace in Ukraine will only open up after a new temporary administration takes charge in Kiev.
In principle, of course, it would be possible, under the auspices of the UN, with the United States, even with European countries, and of course with our partners and friends, to discuss the possibility of introducing temporary administration in Ukraine. For what? In order to hold democratic elections, in order to bring to power a viable government that enjoys the people's trust, and then begin negotiations with it on a peace treaty. Sign legitimate documents that will be recognized throughout the world and will be reliable and stable.
But the war in Ukraine is not a conflict over personalities. The differences run way deeper. The geostrategic chasm of NATO wanting to expand its frontiers eastwards, right until the borders of Russia, is what has sparked this war. And these differences, instead of getting ironed out, are actually becoming more starker. J.D. Vance's visit to Greenland is a case in point. Citing a big, beautiful Atlantic Ocean in between, Donald Trump has been walking back on US security guarantees for Europe under NATO's umbrella. But Trump wants the United States to take over Greenland, as his deputy J.D. Vance minced no words in saying to halt the Russian and Chinese encroachments.
Well, the president said we have to have Greenland, and I think that we do have to be more serious about the security of Greenland. We can't just ignore this place. We can't just ignore the president's desires, but most importantly, we can't ignore what I said earlier, which is the Russian and Chinese encroachment in Greenland.
Russia's President Vladimir Putin was quick to acknowledge the US designs on Greenland. The militarization of the Arctic is not new. For more than a decade, Russia has been building its Arctic military bases, keeping its nuclear missiles locked and loaded in the Arctic. And now, the United States wants to take over Greenland, creating more potential friction between the two nuclear behemoths.
It is obvious that the role and importance of the Arctic for both Russia and the entire world is growing. But unfortunately, geopolitical competition and the struggle for positions in this region are also intensifying. I am sure that if our foreign partners come to these projects, this will guarantee them investments for the long term and with a good return. And therefore, all these projects cannot be postponed for later. They need to be launched and implemented now, as quickly as possible.
The Russia-Ukraine war that was sparked by the creeping frontiers of NATO is far from over. But the ice of the Arctic is melting. The untapped mineral wealth of the Arctic is too appealing for any superpower to look away. With Trump's obsession to take over Greenland, the president had been loudly claiming that he does not want to start a new war for the American people, could inadvertently be unlocking the doors of a whole new war. Two years since the RSF captured Khartoum in a lightning offensive, the tide seems to have decisively turned. The Sudanese Army, which had largely been on the back foot, has now ousted the paramilitary forces from the Sudanese capital. The presidential palace, key government buildings and even the airport have all been wrested out of the hands of the RSF. There were scenes of celebrations on the streets of Khartoum, with people expressing hope that the cycle of violence that began with the civil war may now come to an end. Now, forces that have stayed loyal to General Abdel Fattah al-Burhan have now turned their focus on Darfur. Africa's third largest country is literally now split into two, with the Sudanese National Army controlling the north and the east, while the RSF still has managed to hold its ground in parts of the south and the vast western region of Darfur. Our next report gets you the details.
2 years ago, this journey would have been unthinkable. The Sudanese Army Chief, General Abdel Fattah al-Burhan, landed at the Khartoum airport in a chopper, kissed the ground, and then pumped his fist in the air in a sign of decisive victory. Wrecked planes and other debris still lay on the tarmac, but the RSF fighters who had entrenched themselves in the key government buildings had been pushed out.
Of course, guys, you saw the extent of the destruction to the militia's belongings at Khartoum airport, the civilian planes, and the extent of the devastation that occurred at the airport, things that have nothing to do with the army, even the passengers' bags, and broken things on the tarmac, and the extent of the destruction that occurred to the planes from Badr, Tarko, Sudan Airways, all the civilian planes. These people destroyed them.
This grainy drone footage released by the Sudanese Army reportedly shows the members of the RSF paramilitia fleeing from over the Jebel Aulia Dam across the White Nile River. The Sudanese Army claims it has also gained control of the Tiba al-Hassanab camp, which was described as the RSF's last base in central Sudan and its last stronghold in Khartoum state. The expulsion of the RSF from Khartoum brought the cheering crowds in Port Sudan onto the streets.
The joy, as you can see, fills all the area. Thanks to God, all people are happy, even the residents of Port Sudan. God willing, we will come back to Khartoum and we will celebrate the Eid in our homes there. Personally, I will be the first one to come back home, God willing.
But the war has ruined much of Khartoum. It has uprooted more than 12 million Sudanese people from their homes and has left about half of the 50 million population of Sudan suffering from acute hunger in what the United Nations calls the world's worst humanitarian disaster. But for now though, the Sudanese National Army is celebrating. General Abdel Fattah al-Burhan, who toured through the presidential palace for the first time in 2 years, has ruled out any negotiations with the RSF and has vowed to take on the RSF in its stronghold of Darfur.
There will be no negotiations until these people are no more. They find a place to go to, hand over their weapons, and people pardon them. But as long as they carry weapons, occupy our homes, fight for al-Fashar, and occupy the areas of peaceful citizens, harm them with mortars and drones on a daily basis, and terrorize people, there will be no talk or peace with them.
Following a year and a half of defeats, the army managed to turn the tide late last year, pushing through central Sudan to Khartoum. The RSF still maintains its position in Jebel Aulia, as well as the western and southern outskirts of Omdurman, Khartoum's twin city just across the Nile. Since the war began, the RSF has been accused of looting and taking over civilian homes, with rights groups documenting systematic sexual violence and other abuses. The United States has placed sanctions on both Burhan and Dagalo for war crimes, accusing the RSF chief specifically of genocide in Darfur. Despite the significant blows dealt to the RSF, analysts have warned that the war is far from over. The RSF has announced a military alliance with another rebel group controlling large swaths of South Kordofan and parts of the Blue Nile state near the Ethiopian border. Far from peace, Sudan now looks poised for another partition.
Yemen is the poorest nation in the Arab world, and yet the world's most richest and the most powerful nation has unleashed a sustained campaign of bombing the Houthis in Yemen because they've targeted the commercial ships of Israel and its allies in the narrow Red Sea corridor. The Houthis claim they're doing this in solidarity with the Palestinians of Gaza, who are under the pump due to the Israeli attacks. But the question is this: who are the Houthis? Where do they figure in the Israeli-Gaza war? And how badly have they affected the international commercial shipping? And to what extent will the United States of America go in fighting against the Houthis to help out its good friend Israel? Our next report gets you more details. This video, released by the US CENTCOM, will give you a glimpse of the extent of air attacks launched by the United States of America against the Houthis. Wave after wave of American fighter jets take off from the American aircraft carriers stationed in the region to unleash mayhem on the Houthis. According to the Houthi-run media in Yemen, the American airstrikes have been concentrated in multiple locations north and south of the capital city of Sana'a. In the Sanhan district, south of Sana'a, the Jarban area was struck at least 8 times. To the north, 5 airstrikes targeted the Al-Qadaham and the Jumeimah areas in the Bani Hashish district. These regions are known for their rugged terrain and fortified military barracks. Additionally, the Dailami Air Base, situated north of Sana'a, was hit by 2 American airstrikes. The Americans claim that they have so far targeted the Houthi headquarters, communication nodes, weapons factories, and even some of the over-the-water drone production facilities. The crude air defense systems the Houthis have at their disposal are no match for the American onslaught.
At exactly 10 o'clock, we heard the sound of an airstrike carried out by the oppressive American Zionist aggression on a residential block, a building in a residential neighborhood. When we rushed to the scene, we found that those injured were passers-by on the street, and there was no one in the building. This will not deter us from standing with Palestine and Gaza.
In their turn, the Houthis have fired several missiles at the US warships in the region and also at the State of Israel. This footage, put out by the US military, will give you a glimpse of the very high-tech war that the Americans have unleashed to help out Israel. A Yemeni drone was intercepted over the Red Sea. On the 18th of March, the Houthis claimed to have struck the American aircraft carrier USS Harry S. Truman in the Red Sea. The Houthis further claim that a US destroyer had also been targeted.
The enemy was struck by a state of confusion, which prompted many of its warships to retreat towards the northern Red Sea region, and an air attack that was being prepared against our country was thwarted. The U.S. aggressor bears all the consequences of militarizing the Red Sea and expanding the scope of confrontation by continuing its aggression against Yemen, which negatively impacts international shipping traffic.
Within the United States, the American campaign of attacks in Yemen have created more headlines for the embarrassing signal gate than for the actual attacks that the American fighter jets have unleashed on Yemen. The Pentagon spokesman, Sean Parnell, had this advice to give to the Houthis.
Firing at U.S. military personnel in the region and shooting at our ships and shooting at our drones and putting American lives at risk is not a good way to end this conflict. The Houthis could stop this tomorrow if they said, we're going to stop shooting at your people. But they've clearly chosen not to do that. And so this campaign will be relentless to degrade their capability and to open up shipping lanes in the region and to defend our homeland.
Yemen is witness of the biggest protest rallies against the Israeli war on Gaza. Week after week, thousands and thousands of the Yemeni people have turned up condemning the American-backed war on the Palestinians in Gaza. And despite a heavy price, the Yemenis still insist that the United States will not succeed in bombing them into submission. Donald Trump has repeatedly accused the Houthis of acting on behalf of the Iranians and has threatened that every missile fired by the Houthis will be treated as a missile fired by Iran. In fact, the military analysts point out that the US involvement of a direct attack on the Houthis of Yemen could be a precursor to an American-Israeli attack on Iran. But the Supreme Leader of Iran, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, insists that the Houthis are acting independently of Iran.
One of the big mistakes that American and European politicians make is that they label the resistance centers in the region as Iran's proxy forces. They insult them. What does proxy even mean? The people of Yemen have their own motivation. The resistance groups, the resistance centers in the countries of the region have their own motivations. The Islamic Republic of Iran does not need proxy groups. What does proxy mean? They make their own decisions.
Israel, after unilaterally ending the ceasefire, has resumed its sustained campaign of bombing the Gaza Strip, with Benjamin Netanyahu now insisting that any talks for peace will take place only in the shadow of war. The Israel-Lebanon border, which had remained relatively quiet, came alive this week with reports of a missile being fired from southern Lebanon and Israel unleashing a barrage of airstrikes. Iran too is making its own preparations. The possibility of the Israelis and the Americans targeting the Iranian nuclear sites is never far from the headlines. And the Iranians this week showed off their underground missile city. In this 85-second long clip, the top Iranian military commander, Major General Mohammad Hossein Bagheri, and the IRGC Aerospace Force Chief, Amir Ali Hajizadeh, could be seen touring the fortified complex. What Iran has stored here are some of its most sophisticated missiles, such as the Khyber Shikan, Ghadar Hedge, Sejil, and the Pave land attack cruise missiles. West Asia sits atop a powder keg. with the crackling embers of each conflict setting off another chapter in this war. The battle for air superiority is heating up. Just months after Beijing stunned the world by conducting what was described as a test flight of two distinct prototypes of its sixth-generation fighter aircraft, the American President Donald Trump announced that the United States too is building its own sixth-generation fighter jet. Called the F-47, this sixth-generation fighter will replace the American F-22 Raptors. Now, a country's air force is the crux around which modern warfare revolves. So how do the Chinese and the American sixth-generation fighter jets face off against each other? Our next report gets the details.
This is America's new prototype of a sixth-generation fighter jet called the F-47. The plane's design remains a closely held secret, but would likely include stealth, advanced sensors, and cutting-edge engines. And contrary to expectations, the F-47 is not a successor to the F-35, but actually the successor to the F-22 Raptor, a fighter jet so advanced that the United States does not even sell the fighter jet to other nations to protect its dominance in air superiority. Flanked by his Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth, Donald Trump could not contain his glee as he announced the new American bird to dominate the skies.
The F-47 will be the most advanced, most capable, most lethal aircraft ever built. An experimental version of the plane has secretly been flying for almost 5 years, and we're confident that it massively overpowers the capabilities of any other nation. There's no other nation. We know every other plane. I've seen every one of them, and it's not even close. This is a next level. You know, level 5 is good. This is level 6, they say. The F-47 is equipped with state-of-the-art stealth technology. It's virtually unseeable and unprecedented power. It's got the most power of any jet of its kind ever made. Maneuverability, likewise, is there's never been anything like it, despite the power and speed. Its speed is top. It's over 2, which is something that you don't hear very often. America's enemies will never see it coming. Hopefully we won't have to use it for that purpose, but you have to have it.
So how are sixth-generation fighter jets different from the fifth-generation ones? According to military experts, they are expected to feature improved stealth, higher quality weapons, advanced avionics, and hypersonic capabilities. They're also expected to incorporate artificial intelligence and quantum computing, as well as manned-unmanned teaming with drone wingmen flying alongside. In December 2024, just around Christmas, this video shot in the Sichuan province in China stunned the military aviation world. This was widely speculated to be China's sixth-generation fighter jet that has been in development. The other plane in the background, the J-20 Dragon, is believed to have acted as a chase plane during the test. The new stealth sixth-generation fighter jet aims to push the boundaries of stealth material technology to make an aircraft completely invisible to radars across multiple angles and across all frequency bands. What stands about this fighter jet is its unique tailless aerodynamic design resembling the fan-shaped leaf of Inco tree. The American sixth-generation fighter jets are expected to be ready for combat only by the 2030s. India, that currently operates the Rafale fighter jets, has an invite from Germany and Spain to develop its own sixth-generation fighter jets. The American and the Chinese sixth-generation fighter jets are still in their testing phase, but a new armaments race is on to build the most advanced fighter jets that will realign the balance of power through air superiority in the coming decade.
And with that, it's a wrap on this edition of World at War. And if you want to reach out to me with any comments, feedback or suggestions, please feel free to do so on the ID that you're seeing on your screens. I'm your host, Mohammed Saleh, and I'll see you again next week.